our session moderator, Dr. Neeta Bali. Ma'am, can we have you here on the stage, please? Yeah. So ma'am, I'll be handing over the mic to ma'am and she'll be moderating the session. So we'll try to keep it as interactive as it could be. And we are expecting participation from people sitting in the back as well. So a huge round of applause for our moderator, please. Thank you.
This hopefully should be an interactive session. I'm only here to moderate. You're the ones who are going to give all the inputs. And our session obviously is on, I'm sure everyone's familiar. The session is on shattering traditional frameworks and building on competency-based education. I'm sure as educators, all of you are quite familiar with the word competency because I think the term is almost self-explanatory. So before we start talking about competencies, could we quickly have somebody tell us, how would you interpret competencies? I mean, how would you interpret or how would you explain the term competencies? What does competencies mean to you? Everybody, in fact, across India, our Prime Minister Narendra Modi is constantly talking about competencies. So ma'am, would you?
Thank you so much for giving me a chance to speak. Yeah, competency, as we all know, we are from the field of education. It's knowledge, including the skills as well as the right attitude. If all these three things are clubbed together, we can really have a competency tested. So as we are moving away from the traditional setup, where we would just judge a child from the way he has done, memorized the stuff, that is, we would just test the knowledge. We are slowly moving towards the competency-based education as spearheaded by Mr. Narendra Modi, and it has already come into establish itself in 2015. And we want more and more, uneducated youth, as we all know, in a country like ours, which is so vast, we have 1.26 billion kind of people, are even growing after that. Out of that, 600 million people are the ones who are in below 35 years of age. And they are in the category who could be skilled. But even out of these 400 million people, there are as much as 380 to 90 million people who are without jobs or who do not have the jobs of their kind. We know that there is a mismatch between what they want to take up and what they have been trained for. So there is a need, as we are very much hopeful, that the new education policy that's going to come up would have incorporated all those changes which have come in, but they are still very less, wherein we are trying to now evaluate the listening skills, the speaking skills, the skills when the child is performing a practicals with us, but still it is very less, and we want more and more of skill development starting from the years when the child is in grade 8 itself, moving on to the years when the child passes out from the school. So I think this transition from grade 8 to 12 and moving on to the universities, the skill development has to come in, and that is what the Skill India movement is all about, and we are heading towards it.
Thank you. Let's give a loud round of applause. I think very well explained, very comprehensive explanation. So skills or competencies are basically finely ingrained skills. Narendra Modi ji is constantly talking about skilled India. Majority of the Indian population is a youthful population. So it's very important that these young people who have done their degrees, who have their degrees with them under their belt, should also be employable. So it is very necessary. In that context, I think it becomes very necessary that these young people acquire competencies or finely ingrained skills. We have a lady here who wanted to say. Would you, ma'am? A little more about how would you interpret the term competencies?
A very good afternoon. To what she's already added, I would like to add ability of the child or the person to the list that defines a competency, because competency to me is also what I want to do and I can do, and to match with what is required and matches the need of the market.
Right, right.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think the bottom line is, and probably the most crucial word here is the need. So competencies are concrete skills. Competencies are concrete skills that people need to pick up to be employable. Anyone else would like to give us a perspective on how would you interpret? We have a gentleman there.
I think, good afternoon to all of you. Skills are really a part of it, but what I feel that when we are talking about the competency, we have to look into the perspective of our competitors also, and we have to see that what is that particular skill which I do have and my competitors
Well,
do not
that's a
have.
great idea. I think he deserves a loud round of applause. Rather than simply making a generic statement, I think that was very pertinent. When we talk about competencies in a context, because you are pitted against a lot of competitors, do you have the ability or the skills to match the skills of your competitors? What is it? Do your competencies, do they give you an edge over your competitor? So I think very well said. When you talk about competencies, you have to talk about a competitive skill. Do I have the competitive skill to match and probably to supersede the skills of a competitor? Right. So I think broadly, anyone else would like to express a perspective about what competencies are?
I would put it across as strive for excellence when you are competing with others. So you just aim for the peak. So,
absolutely. When we talk about education today, majority of us know, however hard we might try to deny, I think the education still continues to test content. I don't know how many of you subscribe to that view, but by and large, education today, particularly in the school sector, even though we are gradually moving from rote learning to higher order thinking skills, I think majority of us do know that the examination that the students write, the emphasis is more on being able to learn up, sometimes understand the content. However, the emphasis is not so much, the thrust is not really on application. We all know that. But we also know that because of this, the fallout of the fact that our emphasis is more on learning of content, our emphasis is more on student performance and marks in an examination. Would anybody like to share very quickly what is the fallout of this kind of an emphasis or thrust? When we talk about, yeah, please ma'am.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Basic fallout which we can see is that in ever-changing environment, where the companies are, getting created and destroyed. In this kind of changing environment and very unpredictable environment, the child is not able to think creatively for the solutions.
Absolutely, absolutely. Do you think most of the students who probably do a degree in engineering or even management, are they really employable? Are they employable? Why is it that they're not employable? Because they have not probably developed or cultivated the right skill set. So I think it is high time that as educators, and all of you, of course, I'm sure are very eminent in your own respective fields, I think we need to start now thinking and mulling over the fact that rather than testing content, rather than testing concepts, the emphasis and the thrust has to shift, and it has to shift to skill building. It has to shift to skill building. What advantages do you see when we say, let us build a skill set? What skill sets do you think are necessary for any young person to be able to survive in a fiercely competitive employment environment? What skill sets do you think are necessary? Anyone?
Yeah, to face the challenging environment of 21st century, the first thing is the person should be able to collaborate, should have strong value
Absolutely.
system,
I think no one can work
should be
in isolation.
able to
So
think-
team building
Yes.
becomes the first important skill or
Yes.
competency one has to
and,
develop.
should be able to think out of the box.
Absolutely. Creativity,
Because,
thinking
it's
out
very
of the
important.
box.
Yes, yes. And
Do you agree? Educators,
Yeah.
do you agree?
Mm.
Yes.
Yeah, and should be ethical. That's
Ethical,
one of the
right.
most important part of this century, where we need to
Yes.
have the learners inculcate these
Right.
basic.
Could you please add, ma'am?
Thank you.
As ma'am said, yes, these skills can be developed once we first develop the confidence of the child.
Right.
Confidence building
Right.
is also one of the important skills.
Adaptability, adjustability, confidence, the ability to think out of the box, creative thinking, a very important skill.
Problem
The-
solving also.
The
ma'am.
problem solving,
Decision
right.
making, problem solving
Yes,
will be some of the others.
absolutely. I think the most integral skill that anyone who wants to be in a job market and wants to succeed, or for that matter wants to succeed in life, is definitely the problem solving skill. At any stage in our lives, the problem solving skill. Anyone else would like to add to that list of skills? Yes, ma'am.
Decision making too, ma'am.
Yeah, decision making.
Decision making is very important
Yes.
too.
Who was that, please?
I'm sorry, I'm right here,
I'm,
ma'am.
so- I'm
Decision
sorry, I missed
is
you.
just behind him.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, decision
Right.
making.
Decision making, yes.
Yeah, I would
And
like to
leadership
add to
skills.
this that along with these 7 C's that we have just spoken about, that
Yes.
is collaboration, communication,
Right.
critical thinking,
Right.
career development,
Right.
cooperation, confidence building, creativity, we need to have integration of IT, which is extremely
Great.
important.
The IT skills,
Which
yes.
is what we call 21st century learning skills.
Absolutely.
Without that, we are absolutely incomplete in today's world.
Absolutely.
And the children are doing a lot of work in this direction, problem solving, analytical thinking skills. So IT is an integral part of 21st
Since
century.
ma'am has mentioned the 21st century skills, would anyone like to add a little more to what you think are integral 21st century skills? If you could pass the mic to her, please. As educators, very, very significant that we start thinking beyond the curricula, we start thinking beyond the examination, and we start thinking beyond what a student learns in a classroom. There's so much learning that happens outside the walls of a classroom. Is that right? A lot of experiential learning, a lot of takeaways from the trips that students undertake, the workshops that they attend, the collaboration that schools enter into with various schools across the world. There is a lot of takeaway from that. There are a lot of skills that are developed. But as she very rightly said, we have to be in a state of readiness for developing the 21st century skills. And let me tell you, many of us as educators, people who have been in the field of education for a number of years, in fact, we ourselves we must also start thinking of developing 21st century skills ourselves. Do you agree?
Yes.
Every educator has to be a lifelong learner. You cannot be a good educator unless you are a learner. Could you, ma'am?
Yeah, ma'am, I would like to add one more point here. For 21st century, and as rightly you said, ki first we should have that skills and we should adopt self-management.
Right.
That's working
Could you
on
elaborate a
self.
little more on that? That's a very interesting concept when you say self-management.
Management,
How would you interpret that term? And what is it that you mean by self-management?
Somewhere with the children, self-centered, they are along with the around the parents and society and all, but dipping down in self, maintaining in terms of
Are you
having
talking about introspection?
introspection,
Reflection.
balancing yourself,
Absolutely.
reflection.
Reflection. You know, the key word is a lot of us teach, but do we push children to reflect on their learning? Very often we do not push the children to learn, to reflect. Reflecting is extremely important for us as educators, and for the young people who are under our care. We must teach young people to reflect. Can anyone here talk about the advantages very quickly of the skill of reflection? Why must students reflect? Can we have somebody, the gentlemen? The women are very vocal. I must say they're very empowered women here, and particularly the ones in front. The gentleman there. Could we have the gentleman? Yes. We have only one gentleman who seems to dare to match the women here.
No, I would like to just add two more things that as we're talking about 21st century learning, readiness to change, that is for unlearn and relearn.
Absolutely.
And-
Unlearning and then relearning.
And the second thing is taking appropriate risk with a proper assessment of risk. This
Right.
is very much important in nowadays. I
Yes,
think.
yes, yes. Now, a lot of us depend on formative assessments, summative assessments for developing, the required expertise or whatever, the required level of proficiency. How do you think skills could be tested? We have to start thinking of an alternative. How do you think skills can be tested? How can competencies be tested? Anyone? Yes, please, sir.
Well, we have a brainstorming being conducted with a group analysis, wherein we give topics of discussion, like maths phobia, for example. And they're given some time to talk about it, and then probably they come out with mind maps as the whole scenario being discussed with a group of 5 minimum. And then each of them is given the task to say something, and the thing gets written. And then the teacher is an observer there as a facilitator, gives points out of 5.
Right.
So
Brainstorming sessions could be a great way of building skills and determining the level of proficiency. But let me tell you, whenever we decide to assess something, please remember, as educators, it is very important to devise the right rubrics.
And then after they present also.
Correct.
Make a presentation.
But for the
verbal.
presentation, my request to you, very often we have teachers who talk about a lot of ingenuity in the classrooms. I always tell them, particularly with regard to CCE, it's fine to go ahead and execute CCE, but when you look at the work that is done in the name of CCE, are there proper rubrics to test what level of proficiency has a student achieved? It is very important as teachers, as principals, every time you allow a teacher, now this is from personal experience, every time you allow a teacher to execute the CCE, please make sure that the teacher has the right rubrics to be able to give you a complete picture of what kind of learning has happened. Please be very mindful of rubrics. How else do you think skills could be tested? Yes, ma'am.
Ma'am, to add to all the points that have been spoken here, I feel that any kind of assessment that we're doing, whether it's formative and or summative, presently what we are focused on is the data that we get.
Right.
But what to do with the data is a huge question. That's
Right.
one. Secondly, whenever we talk of the use of assessments, we must essentially remember that depending on the intelligence, the various intelligences that exist with each of the children, we must give them space to create and then allow them to express. Now that expression naturally has to be kind of gauged with the kind of rubrics that are attached to these assessments. Along with that, each of that rubric should be able to give space to each child to be able to be present somewhere according to his own abilities or competencies.
Right. Now, let me come to the next thing. In our normal teaching learning in the classroom, the testing of skills, or for that matter, content, or whatever the student learns, is done in a very structured fashion. How do you think the skills could be assessed? Do we necessarily have to test the skills in a rigid environment, in a structured environment? Yes. How do you think skills can emerge? How can we gauge the skills? What should we allow the students to do? Sorry. Maybe somebody at this table who could speak a little about anyone? Now I'm going to go back to the gentleman and force the gentleman to give us some answers. No, sir. Let's give some other gentleman an opportunity this time. Anyone? Sure. I told you this looks like a session for very empowered women.
I think we could put them into situational...
Who's that? That's you?
Sorry,
Okay,
here, ma'am. Into situations, wherein they could have a problem-solving situation where they would have to work on it. and their skills would come to the fore to handle the situations. So it could be a situational thing that could be given to, it could be a manner of assessment if you have to think of assessment. But why are we thinking of assessing everything anyway? It's a skill. In life, if he,
well,
has
let
one-
somebody else answer that before I do. Why are we thinking of assessing skills? Do you think we should not assess skills? Do you think, yes ma'am, if we could have you speak. Either one of you and then the other one can speak. Could you just take the mic please? There.
Good evening. Well, we should be assessing the skills just to enhance the skills.
Absolutely. Right. Let's give her a loud round of applause. Yes. If you wish to go to the next step, as I told you, competencies are finely ingrained skills. Finely ingrained skills. They may be a component. A competency may be a component of a broader skill. Right? A skill could be split up into sub-skills. All right? When we talk about competencies, generally, each learner will pick up a sub-skill, master that sub-skill, and then move on to the next skill. And then finally acquire the whole skill set. Let me very quickly illustrate this with an example or an analogy. If we talk about learning to drive a car, correct? Learning to drive a car. What is the first 2-3 skills that you would pick up when you're trying to learn to drive a car? The use of the clutch and the use of the brake. Can you possibly ask somebody to go onto the road and start driving straight away? No, you can't. So you have to pick up the first 2 or 3 competencies as certain whether you have mastered those competencies or sub-skills, and only then you move on to the next skill. Is that right? Therefore, I think it becomes very important to assess the skills. We cannot say that you should not. In fact, it is very essential to assess a competency before you can go on to the next competency, right? But rather than testing this competency in a rigid, structured time frame, do you think we could try out something else? Okay. Learning could sometimes be made self-paced, right? When we say self-paced, would you understand by the term self-paced? Competencies can be, learning of competencies can be made self-paced. Any 2 learners, somebody here had spoken about, I think you had spoken about multiple intelligences. Yeah.
You could time the assessment when the child
Is in a state of readiness. Yes. Yes. Reflection and introspection could be part of the assessment. I think when learning of competencies could be made self-paced. Because each of us will learn differently and at different pace. Some of us may learn faster. Some may be a little slow in learning a particular competency. But the aim is all of us must get there. So I think it is time that we change the educational ethos to emphasize more on learning of skills in a self-paced manner rather than in a structured and teacher-directed manner. Now, if we say self-paced learning of competencies, what advantage do you see? Do you envisage an environment like that any time in the future? Do you as educators? Have you ever experimented in your schools or would like to share? Anyone who would like to share an instance? Yes, ma'am.
It comes from the learning that I had as an experience with my own child. My child is in class 12 at the moment, and the kind of confidence that she has gained by applying for different tests, series that are online available for kids, it has helped us to understand where she is at the moment, but also given her the confidence to go back to the class with the kind of learning that she's already tested in at home.
Right.
That is one. Secondly, she is also able to understand what is it that she has not understood without feeling that threat from the classroom environment that is there when the results are being announced, or they have that kind of peer pressure. So this is the child learning on her own without actually the time frame putting a pressure onto her, how much is to be done, what is to be done. I see a lot of qualitative learning happening.
When learning is self-paced, you're not competing. When you're working on your competencies and learning them in a self-paced manner, you're not competing with anyone else. You are simply competing with yourself, right? So when you're simply competing with yourself and trying to enhance your own skills, one, of course, you will require a certain degree of motivation because you're not competing with anyone else. So you will require this inherent motivation that has to well up from within. However, I think when you are in a non-threatening environment, as you very rightly said, when students are competing with one another, the outcome is a lot of stress because of expectations of parents and expectations of teachers. So the students undergo a lot of stress. So when learning is self-paced and when you're only competing with yourself and in a non-threatening environment, the learning is there to stay. And the learning becomes a happy experience. The learning becomes a joyful experience. And all of us talk about the joy of learning, right? But how many of us as educators really create an environment where there is genuine joy of learning? Absolutely, absolutely. Yes. Could you take a mic, sir, so people at the back can hear you?
Along with, self-paced learning is really a very good tool, but along with that, we have always used a peer assessment system with the buddy.
Right.
Which is always fruitful for giving this as an effective tool.
All right. Anyone else who's used an innovative method to build on competencies? Anyone else in a classroom?
I would just like to add something to what sir just said. This side.
Now, who's that speaking?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Sorry. Yeah. That what we say was self-based learning, the negative emotions, the negative emotions that have a big impact on the kid.
Right.
Those are also curbed with that because there is, as I say, non-threatening environment.
Absolutely.
So they dissipate a lot of energy of the child. So that also gets controlled to a large extent.
Anyone else would like to share? I'd very quickly like to ask many of you as educators, I'm sure, are running the IAYP program. Are you running the IAYP? The Duke of Edinburgh program? Are you familiar with the Duke of Edinburgh program? Yeah. So many of you, I'm sure, are executing it in your schools. If you look at the structure of the IAYP program, it very clearly reflects the same concept. The concept of learning for yourself, learning with yourself, and only competing with yourself and no one else. So consequently, when a student enhances a skill and moves from one level to another under the supervision of a teacher, I think the whole process becomes extremely gratifying for the student and helps the student to build a competency that is going to stay for life. Anyone else has any success story to share about how to build competencies in a non-threatening environment? Anyone?
Yeah, I would like to add, the students who are suffering from dyslexia or who are suffering from ADHD, in our school we are working with them on one-to-one basis. That is, we are creating learning designs for them to suit their needs. So depending upon moderating certain subjects, directing them to the areas which they would enjoy more. So therefore, the rubrics and the assessment patterns that we devise for these, differently able children are really helping them, in a different way to come up with their best competencies. And learning to know, moving away from learning to know, it's more about learning to be and to learning to live, which is helping them.
Right, right. So I think, do we have time or are we done with time? 2 minutes. Anyone else who would like to sum up before I close this session? Anyone?
I think we should be using technology, ma'am, for this. When you're even talking about self-paced learning, we should be using technology. I think that's one good thing that will really help all the children. And there's no threatening environment whatsoever, and you get to learn.
Though I personally believe no one can replace the personal touch of a teacher. All right? The empathy, the love, the compassion that a teacher brings to a classroom. Nothing in the world, the best technology in the world cannot replace that. So I think we'll close the session with this. Thank you for being a great interactive audience. Though I really do wish the men had participated a little more. But maybe next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I would request our president, Mr. Hemant, to please felicitate ma'am for being a moderator for the day. Can we have a memento, please? A huge round of applause for ma'am, please. And soon we will start our World Education Awards ceremony. Our chief guest is here for the, special guest is here for the award ceremony. Mr. N.K. Sahu, who is the Economic Advisor, Ministry of Human Resource Development, Government of India. So he is just visiting the expo area. He'll be here.